Good morning. Welcome back. So, today we're going to talk about Cinderella and the magical number of three. You know, it happens a lot, right? Three magic beans, the three times, the two stepsisters plus the main heroine is three. So, we see this over and over again in the fairy tale, and we might be thinking, why? Why does number three happen over and over again? Or if you haven't thought about it before, maybe you are now. Like, yeah, right, why three? Well, one of the things that's interesting is that alchemy is in a lot of ways very similar to fairy tales because alchemy in the Middle Ages was describing in the images, not in the words. If you read the words, they were nonsense. They were like people would read it and think they're nuts. They don't even know what they're talking about. The alchemists were the work was to transform base metals into gold. So people were like, "Oh, they're just crazy." But what they said was that in the words they said nothing, but in the images they said it all. So you had to understand that we weren't looking at it literally, logically, and rationally. And you've heard me say that so many times about the fairy tales. And so I believe, for the exact same reason, that alchemy was concealed, what they were actually doing, which was the transformation of consciousness, according to Jung, that because that's what they were doing was transforming consciousness, and because that wasn't allowed at the time. If you were found out, it was an unhappy demise for you. It wasn't going to go well. So how could they continue to do this inner work and transform themselves, guide others in the transformation process, and ultimately be working on the collective level as well, because we're all connected. And so us individually and the work that we do individually is what transforms the consciousness of the culture. So it was really important that they were doing this work, and they knew that. They also knew that it was important in terms of freeing themselves from the cultural conditioning, to not go along with what the authorities were saying, because what they were telling them wasn't true. They were saying they had taken Christianity and basically had morphed it for their own agenda to say certain things and say what they wanted it to say. And the alchemists, what was coming down to them, possibly from the mysteries, possibly from those initiatory practices, that information then probably came down to us through alchemy and fairy tales. And if you think about it, like, why? It's because that information was that important. And so for hundreds of years, thousands of years, really, because we're talking about Christianity is, 2,000 years old plus. So for all this time, this information has been basically coming to us through different aspects of literature, through the fairy tales, through the myths, and through alchemy, to get here till now, where the feminine is now coming back, that what was repressed and rejected. And if you look, at least in the fairy tales, I'm not that familiar with the alchemical, the esoteric information. It's very, you have to kind of know what you're doing there. I know a little bit of it, just enough. And but they're talking about the same thing essentially as the fairy tales are. So in alchemy, there are three main processes. There's more than that, but there are three main ones. And this is what I usually talk about when I'm talking about the fairy tales, because those three, to me, basically describe the transformation of consciousness. The first stage is the blackening stage, and that has to do with shadow work, which is what we're going to talk about today. The second stage is the whitening stage, and that has to do with things coming to consciousness. And the third stage is the reddening stage. And that to me is the embodiment of it. And what's interesting too about dreams is that you'll see these colors appear in dreams. And so if you're having a dream and you know specifically, like I did last night, there were 2 sculpture stands and there were 2 busts in black clay. And so that would be then the shadow. So I know, like, I haven't worked in and done sculpture in a long time. So the dream is pointing me to that and saying, you know, this is something that's important because it's doubled, which I've talked about. You see this in the fairy tales and the dreams. So doubling means it's very important to individuation and to becoming who you are, that authentic version of yourself. And so that would suggest to me, just upon awakening, because I know about these 3 aspects of alchemy, that would be something that is kind of in the unconscious, something that is not brought into awareness and being lived, right? So it's something that has to be looked at. So they appear, you'll see all 3, and then you'll see combinations of them. You'll see like red and white, and then you'll see maybe a cat that's black and white, and you'll see in stages based in the context of the dream, excuse me, or the story, you'll see like where in the process are you. So it's really an interesting little kind of handy thing to have in terms of understanding more clearly where we are in the process of transforming consciousness. So I decided on Cinderella because it has multiple parts of it that are in 3s. So shadow work is what is in the unconscious. What are we unconscious about? What is our childhood conditioning? What's the situation that we were born into? So the family often has this unconscious conditioning that is their beliefs about themselves in the world. Who are we? How do we fit in the world? What's our role in the world? What's our roles in the family itself? What's acceptable and unacceptable? And what most people don't realize is how much that has been influenced by what we're living in, right? It's like the frog in the milk, right? It's heating so slowly it doesn't even recognize that it's influencing him. And so we would question, like, well, how many generations back do we even go? I've heard different numbers thrown about in terms of what they have found in research. They've been able to prove that we inherit the experiences of our ancestors. And what they've seen is that your ancestor can have an experience, like say one generation of was, let's say, in the Depression, but let's just say that was a grandparent or a great-grandparent that lived through the Depression and maybe didn't have, had scarcity of food or scarcity of some kind of resources. And let's say that your parents didn't have that, and let's say you didn't have that growing up, but they've been able to show in research that actually is still influencing you. You have inherited that. So you could say that on the downside, like, this is the way it works. But on the upside, what you could say is that one of the ways that I think it's possible that this world comes into being is that when we're on the other side and deciding on a lifetime that we're choosing to incarnate into, that we look at the trajectory of both sides, both parents, and we say, okay, this is what this one is carrying down through the generations. This is what this one is carrying down through the generations. I think I'm strong enough. I think I have enough history and enough background that I could come into both of those and be a point of change. I think I have it in me to transform these 2 lineages. So what often looks like victimization or challenges, really, a lot of us have been challenged by our childhoods. And if we flip it like this and see that we weren't, like, I know some people who look at karma say that, you get what you deserve. But I don't think so. I think because life doesn't work that way. I don't believe life works that way. Like, it makes more sense to me that you would be the strongest one. You would be the one that could do it, that said, I think I can do it. I think I can transform this. And then life sets you up to do it. So it like, especially in Cinderella, she looks like the black sheep. She looks like the one who is being rejected. But as I've talked about before, the one who looks like they're the one being rejected, the one who looks like they're going through the hardest time, is the one who's being initiated. The one who they're pushing to wake up and be the one who can transform the consciousness of those two lineages that came together in order to create you. So, how many generations back was there a war? Was there famine? Was there an imposition of beliefs by the authorities onto those that were less than, that they wanted to control, that they wanted to do what they wanted to do? And so lots of times they killed the people who disagreed with them. So these influences are the beliefs that we've inherited. These things influenced what our families believed, what they taught us, and what their worldviews were, what their selves were, and what their roles were viewed as. So how do we see the past? How do we know if we don't have that history? How are we aware of what that history is? All we have to do is look at what's happening around us, what's happening in our own world. What does it look like? What are our challenges? What are the things that don't make sense? Like, I react and I do this, but my childhood doesn't have any evidence that would make this a way for me to act. Then oftentimes we can assume that it comes from someplace else, that it comes from, and it is an inherited something that you're going to take on and transform. So the importance of this is that I believe that in addition to healing these things in the in the family, that it ripples out into the collective and affects the collective. And the fairy tales, I believe, are showing the patterns that we are. I mean, it's like saying in astrology, like if you are a Gemini or you are a Taurus, you kind of have certain qualities that almost all Geminis have, almost all people who are Taurus have. And so the fairy tales take the patterns and they show different patterns. So like Cinderella will show a pattern, Beauty and the Beast, Rapunzel, they're different patterns. And so we can look at these fairy tales and see which ones resonate with us, which patterns reflect our own lives. So for me, as a child, I did a lot of cooking and cleaning. I very much resonated with the Cinderella thing because my parents were, initially my mother worked and on weekends and everything. So I helped with all of that. And then once my parents divorced, then it fell to me once again to take on that role. So initially it was challenging and I was not feeling too good about it. But once I began to understand through the fairy tales that it wasn't like being imposed on me, but it was a part of this initiatory process that I've been going through, it was able to help me reframe it and see things differently. So what did that mean ancestrally? For sure, it came down through the generations. I could even see it I knew my grandparents and my great-grandparents. So I was able to see how it had come down. And I heard from my grandparents enough stories about their lives and their parents and stuff like that, that I was able to really trace. I was lucky in that regard because I was able to really see how things had come down through the generations. And I really paid attention to when I was with the older members of my family, because I learned so much, because I would hear something and like from my grandfather, and then I would talk to my great uncle and I'd be like, whoa, he just said the same thing. Like, how is that possible that they both were like that? So it really was helpful to have an awareness of how this works, because I was able to cultivate all this information, and then through my dreams was able to see how it was coming to me to resolve. And so, okay, so I'll tell you a quick story. This one's kind of interesting. So my grandfather had told stories about World War II and how he wanted to be a pilot. And I happened to talk to my great uncle, and my father wanted to be a pilot. So this is my grandfather's my maternal. So then my maternal great uncle, I was talking to him one day, and he said he wanted to be a pilot. Well, my grandfather couldn't be a pilot when he went into the military because they had too many at that point. They said, we don't need any more. So he became a photographer and a gunner. And so the my great uncle told me about how he wanted to be a pilot, and he never was able to do that. It never worked out. And so when he told me that, I was like, that's crazy. Like my maternal, it's on the maternal side and the paternal side. Then I had a dream about my grandfather's mother, so my maternal great grandmother, who I knew. And in the dream, she was telling me that the grieving process that I believe she and my uncle or my great grandfather went through when they lost their first son, their oldest son, that their grieving process had halted something in the family that made that ability for them to become pilots that was stopped, because she wanted to give me something in the dream, and what she wanted to give me was an origami bird, right? So bird plane, there's a similarity there because they're both about flight. And so I happened to be in California at the Chopra Center, and we were doing this dance thing, and I had decided that I could be freer in my dancing if I, just let myself, made the decision to do it. So I did make the decision. And then I danced. And then when we were done, we went back and sat in our seats. And this little old man came and sat beside me. And he said, what just happened in here? I said, well, they played this music and we all just danced around. He said, oh, as soon as I heard the music, I left. I was like, okay. But he opens up his jacket and he reaches inside and he pulls out a little origami bird. And he takes the tail and he takes the breast and he pulls it, and the little wings go up and down. And I knew it was from my great grandmother. I knew it was like, this is it. This is the track. And so you can see, and subsequently there was a poem that came about great grandmother, and it was very similar and along these lines. So I knew, like, this is part of my work here. This is part of what I've taken on here, is to heal this particular thing in my family and our lineage. So what happens with shadow work is projection. So what's rejected, repressed, devalued, despised it's a projection of unconscious material onto others. So this is another way that we can see what's in the unconscious. What aren't we seeing is, what triggers, what triggers us in others. And that's how we're able to discern what we have inherited. So with Cinderella, in the beginning of the story, the good mother is dying, right? And so we've often talked about how the opening of the fairy tale is telling us what is happening not only personally, but in the culture. So personally, what's happening here is the good mother is dying. On her deathbed, she tells Cinderella to be a good girl. So that's like the projection that's coming out. The good mother now says, okay, you need to be a good girl. The transformation that's happening here, we could say is on one level is representing the death of the great mother, the big mother. But on another level, it could be this kind of passive good mother that kind of just goes along with everything, maybe is silent. So what we're going to see then, the polarity come through, is that the stepmother is a reaction to the good mother. So Cinderella takes that on. I am now the good mother. I have received from my mother her consciousness. She's passing it on to me to now be good the way she was. The stepmother then projects her story onto her daughters, right? So what we see in the stepmother is a real sense of lack and unworthiness. And so she's projecting that on, and then the stepmother and the stepsisters are going to now project that onto Cinderella. So now you are unworthy, and you are inadequate, and you are lacking in 100 ways. So Cinderella then plays the servant to the voices in her psyche. So what we look at in the fairy tales is the stepmother and the stepsisters represent relationships. So this could actually be something you see in your own life, like with somebody else. But what it can also be is that internal, and it typically is, that internal voice. There's the internal voice that's saying these things to her. And then in the fairy tale, they're just, the stepsister and stepmothers represent the way for us to see that here they are in the world, which our world is a reflection of the inner as well. So we can see it in our own lives in the same way. So she plays a servant to the voices in the psyche as well as the stepmother and stepsisters. She's subservient, not enough, unworthy. She hides, right, and plays small. She can't have what she wants. So these are the things she takes on. These can appear in her self-talk as well. So the polarity means that we're having the opposites. This is what we're seeing in terms of in the psyche. What's happening is both views exist. So both views exist in the fairy tale, and both views exist in the psyche. So what happens is the stepmother and stepsisters feel lack, unworthy, but what they do is they play the role of superior, because that's where superiority comes from, a feeling of inferiority. So if I'm feeling inferior, how do I feel superior? Well, I have to make somebody else inferior so I can be superior to them. So that's what's happening here. They're then projecting their inferiority onto Cinderella so they can feel superior. That's the polarity that's playing outside and playing inside, right? They really feel inferior, but they're acting superior by putting others down. So that's what she has going on inside of her. So we have this idea oftentimes, this cursory look at fairy tales like, oh, they're bad and she's good. Cinderella's good, stepsisters are bad. But that's not the case, because it's all existing within us, and that's a projection. So it's a polarity that we accept in our culture, that there's the good and there's the bad. So they easily appear to fall into that polarity, but we're taking those polarities back. We're trying to change this. So in changing this, we bring them together, and we accept that both parts of these exist inside of ourselves. And so this is what we've inherited, again, generationally, ancestrally, and it's playing out in the psyche and in our lives because we need to transform it. You can see this very much in the culture right now. So the more that we're able to do this work and bring these polarities together, the less polarization we will see in our culture of good and bad, good and evil, right and wrong. So we want to do this for ourselves and for the collective. Jung had this term called the transcendent function that was all about holding the polarity, holding the tension, because it really is tension when you're holding both ends of the spectrum. And it takes strength, really, to be able to do this. And that's what the challenges were there for, to prepare you to be strong enough to hold that tension and accept, because shadow work is a challenge. It's the things you don't want to admit about yourself. It's the things that you don't like in others. And so to say, yes, this is in me. I mean, we see this a bit in the work of Byron Katie, right? This is in me, and that I accept that, yeah, it doesn't always feel good. So being willing to look, being willing to see, being willing to understand. I think it was last week that I was talking about that, how the importance of that, being willing to be honest and say, yes, this is in fact in me. It doesn't feel good because it's not something that we value and we think is a good way to be necessarily. So the transcendent function is holding both and accepting both as parts of us and as present in us. Again, to just lessen the resistance to this a little bit, it's mostly inherited. It's not like it's especially like something like jealousy. We think, oh, that's terrible. That's a terrible thing for people to be jealous. That's bad. And if you take the judgment away, you say, okay, this is where I believe this is something I don't think I can have. So if I'm jealous, it's because I don't believe that's a possibility for me. So when we begin to take away these judgments of things, it makes it much easier to process and transform this consciousness that is then reflected in our life. So this is the way to change our life in a real way, in a way that's lasting, in a way that's meaningful. So we hold the opposites, the inferiority and superiority, the unworthiness and worthiness. We sit in that. Both are here, and we accept this, that we're doing the work for our ancestors, and we're doing the work for future generations as well, and we're doing the work for the collective. So just take a look at the news and you'll see it matters to be able to do this. So Cinderella plays the role of inferior. She lives in the kitchen. She sleeps on the hearth among the ashes. Her father even calls her the kitchen drudge. I mean, so he's even gone to the other side. So what's often perceived is that she would be the victim here. She's the victim. They're terrible. She's poor and helpless. Like, look what they do to her. Poor Cinderella, except that, as we know from other fairy tales I've talked about, she's the one that's being initiated. She's the one that is being gifted this lifetime to wake up. So she's doing the cooking and the cleaning, which are alchemical processes. Cooking and cleaning is alchemy. They talk about this in alchemy. Cooking is a transformative process. You can say anything. There's I don't know what you call it, a little thing that they say about, like, if you took the ingredients, you didn't know what you were doing, but if somebody was taking the ingredients and you were just watching, and they took an egg and they broke it and they threw it in a bowl, and they took, pure white milk and they threw that in the bowl, and pure white flour and threw that in the bowl, and you'd be like, they just ruined everything. They just ruined the eggs, they ruined the milk, they ruined the flour, and it's just a massive mess. And then they put it in a pan and put it in the oven, and boom, what comes, something comes out. I don't know what would come out if you did that, but you know what I mean? Like it bakes. And so that process is a transformative process where you take certain things and put them in, and then something else is created. So that's what's happening in consciousness, that you're taking what's there and you are alchemizing it. You are transforming it through the process of working with it. So she sleeps among the ashes. That's what remains from the fire at the end. And so ashes in alchemy are considered a permanent substance. It is what is boiled down when there's nothing that's left. So the conditioning gets all burned away. When the conditioning is all burned away, you get down to the essence of who you are. That's the cooking. That is the cleaning, is the cleansing. Cleaning is grieving. This, right? When you have a good cry, you feel so clean. You feel so cleansed. That's why. You're cleansing and you're healing. So whenever there's the crying, as long as it's not a caught in victim consciousness, there's a process of clearing that's happening. So she grieves for the loss of the personal mother, and in a collective sense, she's grieving for the loss of the big M mother, the mother, because the mother is gone from our culture. She has been basically relegated to the unconscious. So we're living in a culture without mother consciousness, and that has affected the way that we live. That has affected how we consume. That has affected what we live in. The melting pot that we're living in is that she was absent, and she carries certain things with her, that consciousness that we no longer have, right? I think of it as in the qualities of the first chakra that she really represents, like that nurturing, that nourishing, abundance, like groundedness in the body, like kindness, community, care. So all these things that are not typically valued in our culture are often the things that she represents. And so she's missing. She's missing from the stories. I've talked before about Psyche and Amor, which was a part of a bigger work that was done by Apuleius, and it's just a chapter there, but he was initiated. And so I believe that that story contains the initiatory process. But what's interesting about that is that the divine feminine was in the story, and that was Venus. And then she was the initiator. And then the next story that I believe in the link is Beauty and the Beast, that came directly from that. The divine feminine is no longer in the story. Right there we can see this break where we go from the myth to the fairy tale, and now the initiator becomes the stepmother, the stepsisters, the witch, the old woman, and so now she becomes like human. She's no longer the divine mother who is awakening her daughters and sons to the truth of who they are. So we see this in Christianity, where you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So that's the Trinity, the three. And there's a saying, as above, so below, as within, so without. And so, yeah, the Father isn't making the Son with the Holy Spirit. The Father is making the Son with the Mother. So that's what the Holy Spirit is. The Holy Spirit is the Mother. And they've traced this back, and they said, when they look at the original, what is it, Aramaic or whatever the original language is, and they looked at what does it mean. Yeah, initially Holy Spirit was the feminine, and then they changed it to the masculine because, well, that was their agenda. So to diminish the feminine. So that's we can see it there as well, that there was, she went away from that story to a certain degree as well. She's still there. We just often don't hear about it. So when Jesus was baptized, the Holy Spirit as the dove descended. And so, I forgot to grab this. I got a little prompting this morning to share this poem with you. And so this is going to be my closing, which is the witness. The soul as the witness. So when we're able to hold the tension of those opposites, when we're able to see what's going on, I think you'll understand as I read this poem. So these poems are channeled. I channeled them. And they're mostly about transforming consciousness, maybe all about transforming consciousness. I just haven't looked at them just with that in mind to make sure they all did. But most, if not all, are about transforming consciousness. So this one says, the soul is the witness. The soul is the witness, a post-exilic wonder that stands firm and unshaken among the far-strewn rubble. See the merry making she evinces under, for all who have created, the two have become one. Then wherever you may find yourself, whatever you have spoken comes from a place of living, comes from a place of light. Ever merry wonder, understanding meanings, far beyond those earthbound when two have become one. Shining deep within you and shining all around you, the love that once was promised, the kingdom now has come. It's not only within you, but shining all around you. The spell, it has been broken. The two have become one. The veil is rent asunder. The gift is awe-filled wonder. When the old life has gone under, and two have become one. The two have become one. You have fulfilled your mission, understood the freedom when two have become one. So it's really about taking these two and bringing them together as one, the transcendent function. Something is created from the two. When the father and mother come together, those two lines, something new is created. And that would be you, right? When your parents come together, you would be the creation. So in Cinderella, the three is the transformation. The three appears subsequently as her going to the ball 3 times. And then once the prince comes to look for Cinderella with the shoe, it takes 3 times for her to get out into the world. Basically, through this whole process, she's transforming, she's alchemizing this inferiority, superiority, polarity, this unworthiness, worthiness, polarity, which many of us have inherited. And that's the transformation that she's doing. So there's a reluctance, right? She goes from being inferior, she goes to the ball, and she's superior. So now you go from seeing it in the stepsisters and the stepmother and her, right? It goes inside. Now she's playing both roles. She goes to the ball, she's superior, and then she goes home and she's inferior. Superior, inferior. So that happens, 3 times, and then there's a change. So that's what's happening to us in our lives. So if you ever felt like you were the victim, just know you were the strong one. You're the one that came here. You're the one that is lucky enough to transform your consciousness. How good is that, right? Okay, well, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.